When Levin and Stepan Arkadyevitch reached the peasant's izba, where Levin always stopped when he was out hunting, Veslovsky was already there. He was laughing his merrily contagious laugh, sitting in the middle of the hut, and clinging with both hands to a bench from which a soldier, the brother of their host, was pulling him in his efforts to haul off his muddy boots. "I have only just gotten here. Ils ont été charmants. Imagine it, they gave me plenty to eat and drink. What bread! 'Twas marvellous, délicieux, and such vodka I never tasted, and they utterly refused to take any payment. They kept saying, 'Drink it down,' or something like that." "Why should they take money? They regarded you as a guest. Do you suppose they had vodka to sell?" asked the soldier, who at last succeeded in pulling off the wet boot together with the mud-stained stocking. Notwithstanding the dirtiness of the izba, which the huntsmen and their dogs had tracked all over with mud, notwithstanding the smell of bog and gunpowder with which it was filled, and notwithstanding the absence of knives and forks, the three men drank their tea and ate their luncheon with appetites such as only hunting produces. After they had washed up and cleansed off the mud, they went to a hayloft where the coachman had prepared them beds. Although it was already dark, not one of the huntsmen felt any inclination to go to sleep. After they had indulged in various recollections and stories of shooting of dogs, and of previous expeditions, the conversation turned on a theme which interested them all. As it happened, Vasenka kept going into raptures over the fascination of this their camp, and the fragrance of the hay, and the charm of the broken telyaga (it seemed to him to be broken because the front part was taken off), and about the hospitality of the muzhiks, who had given him vodka to drink, and about the dogs, which were lying each at his master's feet. Then Oblonsky gave an account of a charming meet which he had attended the summer before at the place of a man named Malthus, who was a well-known railway magnate. Stepan Arkadyevitch told what wonderful marshes and game preserves Malthus rented in the government of Tver, what equipages, dog-carts, and wagonettes were provided for the sportsmen, and how a great breakfast tent was carried to the marshes and pitched there. "I can't comprehend you," exclaimed Levin, raising himself on his hay. "I should think such people would be repulsive to you. I can understand that a breakfast with Lafitte might be very delightful, but isn't such luxury revolting to you? All these people, like all monopolists, acquire money in such a way that they gain the contempt of people. They scorn this contempt, and then use their ill-gotten gains to buy off this contempt." "You're perfectly right," assented Veslovsky. "Perfectly. Of course Oblonsky does this out of Boheme, but others say Oblonsky goes there." "Not in the least." Levin perceived that Oblonsky smiled as he said this. "I simply consider that this man is no more dishonorable than any other of our rich merchants and nobles. They all have got their money by hard work and by their brains." "Yes, but what kind of hard work? Is it hard work to secure a concession and then farm it out?" "Of course it is hard work in this sense, that if it were not for such men, then we should have no railways." "But it is not hard work such as the muzhik or the student has." "Agreed, but it is work in this sense, that it is a form of activity which gives us results. Railways. But perhaps you argue that railways are useless." "No, but that is another question. I am willing to acknowledge that they are useful, but all gains that are disproportionate to the amount of labor expended are dishonorable." "But who is to determine the suitability?" "Property acquired by any dishonest way, by craft," said Levin, feeling that he could not very well make the distinction between honorable and dishonorable. "For example, the money made by stock gambling," he went on to say. "That is bad, and so are the gains made by fortunes acquired without labor, as it used to be with the speculators in monopolies. Only the form has been changed. Le roi est mort, vive le roi. We had only just done away with brandy farming when the railways and stock gambling came in. It is all money acquired without work." "Yes, that may be very wise and ingenious reasoning. Lie down, Crack," cried Stepan Arkadyevitch, addressing the dog, which was licking his fur and tossing up the hay. Oblonsky was evidently convinced of the correctness of his theory, and consequently argued calmly and dispassionately. "But you do not make the distinctions clear between honest and dishonest work. Is it dishonest when I receive a higher salary than my head clerk, although he understands the business better than I do?" "I don't know." "Well, I will tell you one thing. What you receive for your work on your estate is, let us say, 5,000 above your expenses. But this Muzik, our host, hard as he works, does not get more than 50 rubles. And this disparity is just as dishonorable as that I receive more than my head clerk, or that Malthus receives more than a railway engineer. On the contrary, it seems to me the hostility shown by society to these men arises from envy." "No, that is unjust," said Veslovsky. "It cannot be envy, and there is something unfair in this state of things." "Excuse me," persisted Levin. "You say it is unfair for me to receive 5,000, while the Muzik gets only 50. You're right. It is unfair. I feel it. But—" "The distinction holds throughout. Why do we eat, drink, hunt, waste our time, while he is for ever and ever at work?" said Vassenka Veslovsky, who was evidently for the first time in his life thinking clearly on this question, and therefore was willing to be frank. "Yes, you feel so, but you don't give your estate up to the Muzik," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, not sorry of a chance to tease Levin. Of late there had arisen between the two brothers-in-law a secretly hostile relationship. Since they had married sisters, a sort of rivalry existed between them as to which of them had the best way of living, and now this hostility expressed itself by the conversation taking a personal turn. "I do not give it up because no one demands this of me, and even if I wanted to, I could not," replied Levin. "Give it to this Muzik. He would not refuse it." "But how could I give it to him? Should I come with him and sign the deed?" "I don't know, but if you are convinced that you have not the right—" "I am not altogether convinced. On the contrary, I feel that I have no right to give it away, that I have certain obligations both to the land and to my family." "No, excuse me. If you consider that this inequality is unjust, then why don't you do so?" "I do it, only in a negative way, in the sense that I do not try to increase the discrepancy that exists between him and me." "No, but that is a paradox, if you will allow me to say so." "Yes, that is a sort of sophistical statement," averred Veslovsky. "Ho, friend!" he exclaimed, addressing their host, who had just then come into the loft, making the door creak on its hinges. "Aren't you asleep yet?" "No, how can one sleep? But I supposed you gentlemen were asleep. Still, I heard talking. I wanted to get a hook. Will she bite?" he added, carefully slipping along in his bare feet. "But where do you sleep?" "We are on night duty." "Oh, what a night!" exclaimed Veslovsky, catching a glimpse of the edge of the izba and the unharnessed wagons in the faint light of the west through the now widely opened door. "Just listen to those women's voices singing. It is not bad at all. Who is singing, friend?" said he, addressing the Muzik. "Oh, those are the girls from the farm, singing together." "Come, let us go out and take a walk. We shall never go to sleep. Come on, Oblonsky." "What's the use?" said Oblonsky, stretching. "It's more comfortable here." "Well, then, I'll go alone," exclaimed Veslovsky, jumping up eagerly and putting on his shoes and stockings. "Good‐bye, do svidaniya, gentlemen. If there's any fun, I will come and call you. You have given me a good hunting, and I won't forget you." "He's a splendid young fellow," said Oblonsky, after Veslovsky had gone out and the Muzik had shut the door again. "Yes, he is," replied Levin, still continuing to think of what they had been talking about. It seemed to him that he had clearly, to the best of his ability, uttered his thoughts and feelings, and yet these men, who were by no means stupid or insincere, agreed in declaring that he indulged in sophistries. This confused him. "This is the way of it, my friend," said Oblonsky. "One of two things must be. Either you must agree that the present order of society is all right, and then stand up for your rights, or confess that you enjoy unfair privileges, as I do, and get all the good out of them that you can." "No, if this was unfair, you could not get any enjoyment out of these advantages. At least I could not. With me the main thing would be to feel that I was not to blame." "After all, why should we not go out?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, evidently growing tired of this discussion. "You see we are not going to sleep. Come on, let's go out." Levin made no reply. What he had said in their conversation about his doing right only in a negative sense occupied his mind. Can one be right only in a negative way? He asked himself. How strong the odor of the fresh hay is, said Stepan Arkadyevitch as he got up. It is impossible to go to sleep. Vasenka is hatching some scheme out there. Don't you hear them laughing? And his voice. Won't you come? Come on. No, I am not going, said Levin. Is this also from principle? Asked Stepan Arkadyevitch with a smile, as he groped round in the darkness for his cap. No, not from principle. But why should I go? Do you know you are laying up misfortune for yourself? Said Stepan Arkadyevitch, having found his cap and getting up. Why so? Don't I see how you are giving in to your wife? I heard how much importance you attached to the question whether she approved of your going off for a couple of days' hunting. That is very well as an idol, but it doesn't work for a whole lifetime. A man ought to be independent. He has his own masculine interests. A man must be manly, said Oblonsky, opening the door. What does that mean? Going and flirting with the farm girls? Asked Levin. Why not go, if there's fun in it? Ce n'est pas sa conséquence. My wife would not be any the worse off for it, and it affords me amusement. The main thing is the sanctity of the home. There should not be any trouble at home. But there is no need of a man's tying his hands. Perhaps not, said Levin dryly, and he turned over on his side. Tomorrow I must start early, and I shan't wake anyone, and I shall start at daybreak. Messieurs, venez vite, called Vasenka, returning. Charmant! I have discovered her. Charmant! A perfect Gretchen, and she and I have already scraped acquaintances. Truly she is mighty pretty, he cried, with such an expression of satisfaction that anyone would think that she had been made for his especial benefit, and that he was satisfied with the work of the one who had prepared her for him. Levin pretended to be asleep, but Oblonsky, putting on his slippers and lighting a cigar, left the barn, and soon their voices died away. It was long before Levin could go to sleep. He heard his horses munching their hay, then the muzhik setting out with his eldest son to watch the animals in the pasture, then the soldier going to bed on the other side of the loft with his nephew, the youngest son of their host. He heard the little boy in a low voice telling his uncle his impressions regarding the dogs, which to him seemed terrible and monstrous beasts. Then the boy asking what those dogs caught, and the soldier in a hoarse and sleepy voice telling him that the next day the huntsmen would go into the swamp and would fire off their guns. And then, the boy still continuing to ply him with questions, the soldier hushed him, saying, "Go to sleep, Vaska, go to sleep, and you will see." And soon the man began to snore, and all became quiet. All that was heard was the neighing of the horses and the cries of the woodcock. Why is this simply revolting? He asked himself. Well, what is to be done? It is not my fault. And he began to think of the morrow. Tomorrow I will start early in the morning, and I will take it on myself not to get excited. I will bring down some woodcock, and there are plenty of snipe, and when I get back there'll be a letter from Kitty. Yes, perhaps Stiva is right. I am not manly toward her. I am too much under my wife's thumb. But what is to be done about it? This also is revolting. Through his dream he heard Veslovsky and Stepan Arkadyevitch gaily talking and laughing. For an instant he opened his eyes. The moon had risen, and through the open doors he saw them standing there in the bright moonlight and talking. Stepan Arkadyevitch was saying something about the freshness of a young girl, comparing her to a walnut just out of its shell, and Veslovsky, laughing his contagious laugh, made some reply, evidently repeating the words spoken by some muzhik, "You'd better be going home." Levin spoke through his dream. "Gentlemen, tomorrow at daybreak." Waking at earliest dawn, Levin tried to wake his companions. Vasenka, lying on his stomach with one leg in a stocking, was sleeping so soundly that it was impossible to get any reply from him. Oblonsky, only half awake, refused to start out so early. And even Laska, sleeping curled up in a round ball at the edge of the hay, got up reluctantly and lazily stretched out and straightened her hind legs, one after the other. Levin, putting on his boots, took his gun and cautiously opening the creaking door of the shed, went outdoors. The coachmen were sleeping near the wagons. The horses were dozing. Only one sheep was drowsily eating with its nose in the trough. It was still grey in the yard. "You are up early, aren't you, my dear?" said the old peasant woman, the mistress of the house, coming out from the izba and addressing him in a friendly way, like an old acquaintance. "Yes, I'm going out shooting, auntie. Can I go this way to the swamp?" "Directly behind the barns. Follow the footpath, along by the hemp field." Stepping cautiously with her bare sunburnt feet, the old woman accompanied Levin as far as the fence back of the barn. "Go straight on, and you'll come to the swamp. Our boys went there last evening." Laska ran merrily ahead along the footpath. Levin followed her with swift, light steps, constantly watching the sky. He had an idea that he would reach the swamp before the sun would be up. But the sun did not loiter. The moon, which had been shining brightly when he first came out, was now growing pallid like a lump of quicksilver. The morning star, which before was most conspicuous, now almost defied detection. Certain spots before almost indistinguishable on the distant field were now becoming plainly visible. These were heaps of rye. The dew, though it could not be seen in the absence of the sunlight, was so dense on the fragrant tall hemp from which the seed had already been gathered that it wet Levin's legs and blouse above his belt. In the transparent stillness of the morning the slightest sounds were audible. A bee, humming like a bullet, whizzed by Levin's ear. He looked around and discovered a second, and yet a third. They were coming from the hives and were flying over the hemp field and disappearing in the direction of the swamp. The footpath led directly into the marsh, which could be detected by the mists rising over it, here denser, there thinner, so that clumps of grass and cytisus bushes looked like little islands emerging from them. Peasant boys and men who had been on night duty were scattered about on the edge of the swamp and along the roadside, and all of them were sleeping wrapped up in their kaftans. At a little distance from them 3 horses were moving about unfastened. One of them carried clinking chains. Laska ran along by her master's side, eager to dash ahead, and with her eyes on everything. After they had passed the sleeping muzhiks and had reached the first swampy places, Levin examined the priming of his gun and let the dog go. One of the horses, a fat chestnut 3-year-old, seeing Laska, shied and, lifting his tail, whinnied. The 2 other horses were also startled, and dashed through the water and galloped out of the swamp. As they pulled their hoofs out of the soft, sticky mud, they made a noise like smacking. Laska paused, looking with her amused eyes at the horses, and seemed to ask her master what she should do. Levin caressed her and gave a whistle as a signal that she might begin her work. Laska, joyous and full of importance, darted on over the soil of the marsh, which quaked under her weight. As soon as she got fairly into the bog, Laska instantly distinguished amid all the well-known odors of roots and swamp grass, and the mud and the droppings of the horses, the scent of the bird perceptible through the whole place, the penetrating bird odor which more than anything else excited her. Wherever there was moss or sage bushes, this odor was peculiarly strong, but it was impossible to make out in which direction it increased or diminished in strength. In order to get her bearings, the dog had to bear to the lee of the wind. Unconscious of any effort in moving her legs, Laska, in an eager gallop, yet so restrained that she was able to stop at a bound, if anything of consequence presented itself, dashed toward the right, away from the breeze which was now beginning to blow freshly from the east. Snuffing the air with her widespread nostrils, she suddenly became conscious that she was no longer following a trail, but was on the game itself, not one bird alone, but many. Laska slackened her speed. The birds were there, but she could not as yet determine exactly where. In order to find the exact spot, she began another circle, when suddenly the voice of her master called her back. "Here, Laska!" he cried, directing her to the other side. She paused as if to ask him if she had not better keep on as she had begun, but he repeated his command in a stern voice, sending her to a tussock-covered place, overwhelmed with water, where there could not possibly be anything. She heard him, and, pretending to obey him, so as to satisfy him, ran hastily over the spot indicated, and then returned to the place which had attracted her before, and instantly perceived them again. Now that he no longer bothered her, she knew exactly what to do. And without looking where she was going, stumbling over tussocks to her great indignation and falling into the water, but quickly extricating herself with her strong agile legs, she began to circle round so as to get her exact bearings. The scent of the birds kept growing stronger and stronger, more and more distinct, and suddenly it became perfectly evident to her that one of them was there, just behind a certain tussock, not 5 steps in front of her, and she stopped and trembled all over. Her legs were so short that she could not see anything, but she knew by the scent that the bird was sitting there not 5 steps distant from her. She pointed, growing each instant more certain of her game and full of joy in the anticipation. Her tail stuck straight out and only the end of it quivered. Her mouth was open slightly. Her eyes were cocked up. Indeed, one ear had been all the time pricked up as she ran, and she was panting heavily, but cautiously, and looking round still more cautiously, rather with her eyes than with her head, to see if her master was coming. He was coming, leaping from tussock to tussock, and more slowly than usual it seemed to her. His face bore the expression which she knew so well and which was so terrible to her. It seemed to her that he was coming slowly, and yet he was running. Remarking Laska's peculiar method of search as she crouched down close to the ground and took such long strides that her hind legs seemed to rake the ground, and noticing her slightly opened mouth, Levin knew that she was on the track of snipe, and offering a mental prayer to God that he might not miss especially his first shot, he followed the dog. As he came up close to her he looked from his superior height and saw with his eyes what she perceived only with her nose. In a nook between 2 tussocks, not more than 6 feet away from him, a snipe was sitting. With head raised it was listening. Then, slightly spreading and closing its wings, and awkwardly wagging its tail, it hid behind its nook. At him! At him!" cried Levin, pushing Laska from behind. "But I can't move," thought Laska. "Where shall I go? From here I smell 'em, but if I stir I shan't find anything, or know what they are, or where they are." But Levin again pushed the dog with his knee, and in an excited whisper he cried again, "At him, Latoshka, at him!" "Well, if he wants me to do it, I will, but I won't answer for the consequences now," she said to herself, and she darted forward with all her might between the tussocks. She no longer went by scent, but only by her eyes and ears, and did not know what she was doing. 10 paces from the first place a second snipe arose with a loud squawking and a characteristic drumming of wings. Instantly the shot rang out, and the bird fell heavily with its white breast on the moist ground. Still another immediately flew up, not even roused by the dog. When Levin aimed at it, it was already a long shot, but he brought it down. After flying 20 feet or more, the second snipe rose high into the air and then, spinning like a top, fell heavily to the ground on a dry spot. "That is the talk," thought Levin, thrusting the fat snipe, still warm, into his hunting bag. "Ha, Latoshka, there is some sense in this, eh?" When Levin, having reloaded, went still farther into the swamp, the sun was already up, though it was as yet hidden behind masses of clouds. The moon, which had now lost all its brilliancy, looked like a white cloud against the sky. Not a star was to be seen. The swampy places, which before had been silvered with the dew, were now yellow. The whole swamp was amber. The blue of the grass changed into yellowish green. The marsh birds bustled about among the bushes glittering with dew and casting long shadows along by the brook. A hawk awoke and perched on a hayrick, turning his head from side to side, looking with displeasure at the marsh. The jackdaws flew fieldward, and a barefooted urchin was already starting to drive the horses up to an old man who had been spending the night there, and was now crawling out from under his caftan. The gunpowder smoke lay white as milk along the green grass. One of the peasant children ran down to Levin. "There were some ducks here last evening, uncle," he cried, and followed him at a distance. And Levin experienced a feeling of the keenest satisfaction in killing 3 woodcock, one after the other, while the boy was watching him and expressing his approbation. The superstition of hunters, that if the first shot brings down bird or beast the field will be good, was justified. Tired and hungry, but delighted, Levin returned about 10 o'clock, after a run of 30 versts, having brought down 19 snipe and woodcock and 1 duck, which, For want of room in his game-bag, he hung at his belt. His companions had been long up, and after waiting till they were famished, they had eaten breakfast. Hold on, I know there are 19, cried Levin, counting for the second time his woodcock and snipe, with their blood-stained plumage, and their drooping heads, all laid one over the other, so different from what they were on the marsh. The count was verified, and Stepan Arkadyevitch's envy was delightful to Levin. It was also delightful to him, on returning to his lodging, to find there a messenger who had just come from Kitty, bringing him a letter. I am perfectly well and happy, and if you fear lest I shall not be sufficiently cared for, you may be reassured. I have a new bodyguard in the person of Marya Vasylievna. She was a midwife, a new and very important personage in Levin's family. She came over to see me. She thinks I am wonderfully well, and we shall keep her till you get back. We are all well and happy, and if you are enjoying yourself and the hunting is good, you must stay another day. These two pleasures, his successful hunt and the letter from his wife, were so great that they effaced from Levin's mind two less agreeable incidents. The first was the fact that his fast horse, who had apparently been overworked the evening before, refused to eat and was out of sorts. The coachman said that she was used up. "They abused her last evening, Konstantin Dmitrich," said he. "The idea! They drove her 10 versts at full speed." The second unpleasantness, which for the first moment put an end to his happy frame of mind, but which afterward caused him no end of amusement, arose from the fact that not a thing was left for him from all the abundant store of provisions which Kitty had put up for them, and which it seemed ought to have lasted them a whole week. As he returned from his long and weary tramp, Levin had indulged his imagination in certain tarts, so that when he entered the izba, he actually felt the taste of them in his mouth, just as Laska scented the game, and he immediately ordered Philip to serve them to him. It then transpired that not only the tarts, but all the cold chicken had disappeared. "There, talk of appetites," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, laughing and nodding at Vassenka Veslovsky. "I cannot complain of mine, but this is marvelous." "Well, what shall I do?" cried Levin, glowering at Veslovsky. "Philip, give me some cold beef." "Beef's all gone, and the dogs have got the bones," replied Philip. Levin was so irritated that he could not help exclaiming, "I should think you might have left something for me," and he felt like crying. "Then cook me a woodcock," he said with trembling voice to Philip, trying not to look at Vassenka, "and bring me some milk." But after he drank his milk he was mortified because he had shown his disappointment so plainly and before a stranger, and he began to laugh at himself for his anger. In the afternoon they went out into the fields again, and even Veslovsky shot several birds, and at night they went home. They were as gay on their return as they had been while going. Veslovsky now sang songs, and now told of his adventures with the muzhiks who gave him his vodka and bade him drink it down quick. Then he related his nocturnal experiences with the nuts and the farm girl, and the muzhik who asked him if he was married or not, and who, when he found out that he was not married, said to him, "Well, you'd better not be running after other folks' women. First of all go home and get a wife for yourself." This advice greatly amused Veslovsky. "Well, on the whole, I am awfully glad we went. Aren't you, Levin?" "Very glad," replied Levin sincerely, and he was especially happy because he no longer felt that animosity which he had felt at home toward Vassenka Veslovsky. But, on the other hand, he conceived a genuine friendship for him. About 10 o'clock the next morning, after inspecting the farm, Levin knocked at the door of the room in which Vassenka had spent the night. "Entrez!" cried Veslovsky. "Excuse me, but I am just finishing my ablutions," he added, with a smile, standing before Levin in his bare skin. "Do not let me disturb you," said Levin, and he sat down by the window. "Did you sleep well?" "Like the dead. Is it a good day for hunting?" "What do you drink, tea or coffee?" "Neither. I always go down to breakfast. I am mortified at being so late. The ladies, I suppose, are already up? A splendid time for a ride. You must show me your horses." After walking around the garden, examining the stable, and performing a few gymnastic exercises together on the parallel bars, Levin and his guest returned to the house and went into the drawing-room. "We had a splendid sport, and got so many new impressions," said Veslovsky, approaching Kitty, who was sitting near the samovar. "What a pity that ladies are deprived of this pleasure." Well, of course he must have something to say to the lady of the house, thought Levin. Again he detected something peculiar in the smile and the triumphant air with which his guest behaved toward Kitty. The princess, who was sitting on the other side of the table, with Marya Vasyevna and Stepan Arkadyevitch, called Levin to her and began to broach her idea that they should go to Moscow for Kitty's confinement, and explain to him how the room should be prepared for her. Just as all the preparations for his wedding had seemed distasteful to Levin because they were so insignificant in comparison with the majesty of the event itself, so now even more humiliating were all the preparations for the approaching confinement, the time of which they were reckoning up on their fingers. He tried to shut his ears to all the talk about the various kinds of swaddling clothes for the unborn infant. He did his best to shut his eyes to all the mysterious and numberless bands and triangular pieces of linen to which Dolly seemed to attribute special importance, and the like. The event of the birth of a son, for he was firmly persuaded that it would be a son, seemed to him so extraordinary that he could not believe in its possibility. And while on the one hand it promised him a happiness too enormous and therefore incredible, on the other hand it seemed to him too mysterious to admit of trying to imagine what it meant, and consequently all this preparation as if something commonplace, for something in the hands of men, seemed to him revolting and humiliating. The princess did not understand his feelings, and she attributed his unwillingness to think and talk about this to indifference and carelessness, and so she gave him no peace. She had just been charging Stepan Arkadyevitch to look up a suite of rooms, and now she called Levin to her. "Do as you think best, princess. I understand nothing about the matter," said he. "But it must be decided just when you will go to Moscow." "Truly, I don't know. What I know is that millions of children are born away from Moscow, and doctors, and all that." "Yes, but in this case—" "Let Kitty do as she pleases about it." "It is impossible to speak with Kitty about it. Do you want me to frighten her? Only this spring Natalie Golitsyn died in consequence of an unskilled au coeur." "I shall do as you wish," repeated Levin angrily. The princess began to say something more to him, but he was not listening. Though his conversation with the princess upset him, he was not angered by what she said, but by what he saw at the samovar. "No, that can't go on," thought he, as he from time to time glanced over at Vasenka, who was bending down to Kitty with a flattering smile and making some remark to her, and he noticed his wife's disturbed and blushing face. There was something improper in Veslovsky's attitude, his smile, his eyes. So, too, Kitty's action and appearance seemed to him unbecoming, and again the light flashed in his eyes, and again, as happened 2 days before, he felt him suddenly, without the least warning, precipitated from the height of happiness, contentment, and dignity into the abyss of despair, hatred, and confusion. Again they seemed to him, each and all, his enemies. "Do just as you please, princess," he said again, turning round. "Heavy is the cap of Monokma," said Stepan Arkadyevitch in jest, referring evidently, not to Levin's conversation with the princess, but to the cause of Levin's agitated face, which he had noticed. "How late you are, Dolly!" All rose to greet Darya Alexandrovna. Vasenka also arose, but only for a moment, and with the lack of politeness characteristic of up-to-date young men toward ladies, scarcely bowing, he resumed his conversation with some humorous remarks. "Masha has been wearing me all out," said Dolly. "She did not sleep well, and she is terribly fretful today." The conversation which Vasenka and Kitty were engaged in once more turned, as it had the evening before, on Anna, and whether love could hold outside the conventions of society. This conversation was disagreeable to Kitty, and it agitated her, not only by reason of the topic and the tone in which it was carried on, but still more because she was already conscious of the effect it would have on her husband. But she was too simple and innocent to understand how to put an end to it, or even to hide the signs of agitation which this man's too pronounced attentions produced in her. Whatever she did, she knew perfectly well would be remarked by her husband, and would be absolutely misinterpreted. And indeed, when she asked Dolly what was the matter with Masha, and Vasenka, waiting till this new subject of conversation, which was a bore to him, should be finished, stared with an indifferent look at Dolly, this question struck Levin as an unnatural and obnoxious kind of slyness. "Well, Are we going after mushrooms today?" asked Dolly. "Oh, yes, do let us go. I should like to get some," said Kitty, and she blushed. For mere politeness' sake she wanted to ask Vasenka if he would go with them, but she did not do so. "Where are you going, Kostya?" she asked with a guilty air, as her husband, with deliberate steps, went by her on his way out of the room. This guilty confusion confirmed all his suspicions. "A machinist came while I was away. I've not had a chance to see him yet," he answered, without looking at her. He had gone downstairs, but had not yet left his library, before he heard Kitty's well-known footsteps imprudently hurrying after him. "What is it? We are busy," he said curtly. "Excuse me," said Kitty, addressing the German machinist. "I wish to say a few words to my husband." The machinist was about to leave, but Levin stopped him. "Don't disturb yourself." "I don't want to lose the 3 o'clock train," remarked the German. Without answering him, Levin went out into the corridor with his wife. "Well, what is it you wish to say to me?" he asked in French. He did not look at her face, and did not want to see how it quivered and what a look of pathetic humiliation was in her eyes. I wanted to say that it is impossible to live so. It is torture," murmured she. "There is some one there at the cupboard," he replied angrily. "Don't make a scene." "Then let us go in here, then." Kitty wanted to go into the next room, but there the English governess was teaching Tanya. "Then let us go into the garden." In the garden they ran across a muzhik who was weeding a path. And now, no longer thinking that the muzhik would see her tearful or his agitated face, not thinking that they were in sight of people, as if running from some unhappiness, they went with swift steps straight on, feeling that they must have a mutual explanation, and find some lonely spot where they could talk, and free themselves from this misery that was oppressing them both. "It is impossible to live so. It is torture. I suffer. You suffer. Why is it?" she said, when at last they reached a bench standing by itself in the corner of the linden alley. "But tell me one thing. Was not his manner indecent, improper, horribly insulting?" he asked, standing in front of her in the same position, with his fist doubled up on his chest, in which he had stood before her 2 days before. "It was," said she in a trembling voice. "But, Kostya, can't you see that I am not to blame? All this morning I have been trying to act so that... But oh, these men! Why did he come? How happy we were!" she said, choking with the sobs that shook her whole body. The gardener saw with surprise that, though nothing was chasing them, and there was nothing to run away from, and there was nothing especially attractive about the bench before which they had been sitting, yet still they went past him back to the house with peaceful, shining faces. As soon as he had taken his wife to her room, Levin went to seek Dolly. Darya Alexandrovna also was in a state of great excitement. She was pacing up and down her chamber, and scolding little Masha, who stood in a corner, crying. "You shall stay all day in the corner, and eat dinner alone, and you shall not see one of your dolls, and you shall have no new dress," she was saying, though she did not know why she was punishing the child. "This is a naughty little girl," she said to Levin. "Where does she get this abominable disposition?" "Why, what has she done?" asked Levin, rather indifferently, for he was annoyed to find that he had come at the wrong time, when he wished some advice regarding his own affairs. "She and Grisha went into the raspberry bush, and there... But I can't tell you what she did. I'd 1,000 times rather have Miss Eliot. This governess doesn't look after anything. She's a machine. Figurez-vous que la petite." And Darya Alexandrovna related Masha's misdeeds. "There's nothing very bad in that. That doesn't signify a bad disposition. It's only a piece of childish mischief," said Levin soothingly. "But what is the matter with you? You look troubled. What has happened downstairs?" asked Dolly, and by the tone of her questions Levin perceived that it would be easy for him to say what he had in his mind to say. "I haven't been downstairs. I've been quite alone in the garden with Kitty. We've just had a quarrel, the second since... Stiva came." Dolly looked at him with her intelligent, penetrating eyes. "Now tell me, with your hand on your heart," he said, "tell me, was the conduct, not of Kitty, but of this young man, anything else than unpleasant? not unpleasant, but intolerable, insulting even, to a husband." "What shall I say to you? Stand in the corner," she said to Masha, who, noticing the scarcely perceptible smile on her mother's face, started to go away. "Society would say that he is only behaving as all young men behave. Il fait le cour une jeune et jolie femme. And her husband, as himself a gentleman of society, should be flattered by it." "Yes, yes," said Levin angrily. "But have you noticed it?" "I noticed it, of course, and so did Stiva. Just after tea he said to me, 'Je crois que Veslovsky fait un petit brin de cour à Kitty.' I believe Veslovsky is trying to flirt with Kitty." "Well, that settles it. Now I am calm. I'm going to send him away," said Levin. "What? Are you out of your senses?" cried Dolly, alarmed. "What are you thinking about, Kostya?" she went on with a laugh. "You may go now to Fanny," she said to the child. "No, if you like I will speak to Stiva. He will get him to leave. He can say you are expecting company. However, it is not our house." "No, no, I will do it myself." "You will quarrel." "Not at all. I shall find it amusing," said he, with a happier light shining in his eyes. "There, now, Dolly, forgive her. She won't do it again," he said, pointing to the little culprit, who had not gone to Fanny, but was now standing irresolute beside her mother, and looking askance at her with pleading eyes. The mother looked at her. The little girl, sobbing, hid her face in her mother's lap, and Dolly laid her thin hand tenderly on her head. "Is there anything in common between us and that fellow?" thought Levin, and he went to find Veslovsky. As he passed through the hall he ordered the carriage to be made ready to go to the station. "The springs were broken yesterday," the servant answered. "Then bring the tarantass, only be quick about it. Where is the guest?" "He went to his room." Levin found Vasenka in the act of trying on his gaiters in preparation for a ride. He had just taken his things out of his valise and laid aside some new love songs. Either there was something strange in Levin's expression, or Vasenka himself was conscious that ce petit brin de cour which he was making was rather out of place in this family, but at all events he felt as uncomfortable in Levin's presence as it is possible for an elegant young man to feel. "Do you ride in gaiters?" asked Levin. "Yes, it's much neater," replied Vasenka, pulling up one fat leg on a chair, and struggling with the bottom button, and smiling with genuine good humor. He was really a very good-hearted young fellow, and Levin felt sorry for him, and conscience-stricken for himself as his host, when he saw the timidity in Vasenka's eyes. On the table lay a fragment of a stick, which they had broken off that morning while trying to prop up the parallel bars for their gymnastic exercises. Levin took this fragment in his hand, and began to break off the ragged ends, not knowing how to commence. "I wanted—" He stopped for a moment, but suddenly remembering Kitty and all that had taken place, he went on, looking him squarely in the eye. "I have had the horses put in for you." "What do you mean?" began Vasenka in surprise. "Where are we going?" "You are going to the railway station," said Levin, with a frown, breaking off the end of the stick. "Are you going away? Has anything happened?" "I happen to be expecting company," Levin went on, breaking off pieces of his stick more and more nervously with his strong fingers. "Or, no, I am not expecting anyone, and nothing has happened, but I beg you to go away. You may explain my lack in politeness as you please." Vasenka drew himself up. "I beg you to explain to me," said he with dignity, comprehending at last. "I cannot explain to you, and you will be wise not to question me," Levin said slowly, trying to remain calm and to check the tremulous motions of his face. As the chipped pieces of the stick were by this time all broken, Levin took the stick in his fingers, split it in two, and picked up the part that fell to the floor. Apparently the sight of those energetic hands, those very muscles which he had seen tested that morning while they were doing their gymnastics, those flashing eyes, and the quivering face, and the subdued sound of his voice impressed Vasenka more than the spoken words. Shrugging his shoulders and smiling disdainfully, he submitted. "May I not see Oblonsky?" The shrugging of the shoulders and the smile did not annoy Levin. What else could he do? He asked himself. "I will send him to you immediately." "What sense is there in such conduct?" exclaimed Stepan Arkadyevitch when he had learned from his friend that he was to be driven from the house, and finding Levin in the garden, where he was walking up and down waiting for his guest's departure. "Mais c'est ridicule! To be stung by such a fly as that!" "Mais c'est du dernier ridicule! What difference does it make to you if a young man—" But the spot where the fly had stung Levin was evidently still sensitive, because he turned pale again and cut short the explanations which Stepan Arkadyevitch tried to give. "Please don't take the trouble to defend the young man. I can't help it. I am sorry both for you and for him. But I imagine it won't be a great trial for him to go away, and my wife and I both found his presence unpleasant." "But it was insulting to him. Et puis c'est ridicule." "Well, it was humiliating and extremely disagreeable to me. I am not to blame toward him, and there is no reason why I should suffer for it." "Well, I did not expect this of you. Un poète est très jaloux. Mais à ce point c'est du dernier ridicule." Levin quickly turned away and entered the thick shrubbery by the driveway, and continued to walk up and down the path. Soon he heard the rumbling of the tarantass, and through the trees he saw Vassenka riding up the road, sitting on the straw, for unfortunately the tarantass had no seat, the ribbons of his Scotch cap streaming behind his head as he jolted along. "What now?" thought Levin, as he saw a servant run from the house and stop the cart. It was only to find a place for the machinist, whom Levin had entirely forgotten. The machinist, with a low bow, said something to Veslovsky, and clambered into the tarantass, and they drove off together. Stepan Arkadyevitch and the old princess were indignant at Levin's conduct, and he himself felt that he had been not only ridiculous in the highest degree, but even blameworthy and disgraceful. But as he remembered all that he and his wife had suffered, he asked himself how he should do another time in similar circumstances, and his answer was that he should do exactly the same thing again. In spite of all this, toward the end of the day, all of them, with the exception of the old princess, who could not forgive Levin's behavior, became extraordinarily gay and lively, just like children after a punishment, or like grown people after a solemn official reception, so that in the evening, in the absence of the old princess, they talked about the dismissal of Vassenka as about something that had taken place long, long before. And Dolly, who had inherited from her father the gift of telling a funny story, made Varenka laugh till she cried, by telling her 3 and 4 times, and each time with new amusing details, how she had just put on, in honor of their guest, some new ribbons, and was just going into the drawing-room when, at that very minute, the rattle of an old tumble-down wagon drew her to the window. Who was in this old tumble-down wagon? Vassenka himself, and his Scotch cap, and his love songs, his romantic airs, and his gaiters, seated on the straw. If only a carriage had been given him! But no! Then I hear a shout, "Hold on!" Well, I say to myself, they have taken pity on him. Not in the least. I look and see a fat German, and off they go, and my ribbons were wasted. Darya Alexandrovna carried out her plan of going to see Anna. She was sorry to offend her sister, or to displease her sister's husband. She realized that the Levins were right in not wishing to have anything to do with Vronsky, but she considered it her duty to go see Anna, and prove to her that her feelings could not change, in spite of the change in her position. In order not to be dependent on the Levins, Darya Alexandrovna sent to the village to hire horses, but Levin, when he heard about it, went to her with his complaint. "Why do you think this journey would be disagreeable to me? And even if it were, it would be still more unpleasant for me not to have you take my horses," said he. "You never told me that you were really going. But to hire them from the village is disagreeable to me in the first place, and chiefly because, though they undertake to get you there, they will not succeed. I have horses, and if you don't wish to offend me, you will take mine." Darya Alexandrovna had to yield, and on the appointed day Levin had all ready for his sister-in-law a team of 4 horses and a relay, made up of working and saddle horses, a very far from handsome turnout, but capable of taking Darya Alexandrovna to her destination in one day. Now that horses were needed to take the old princess out for her daily drive, and for the midwife, it was a rather heavy burden for Levin. But, according to the law of hospitality, he could not possibly think of allowing Darya Alexandrovna to hire horses outside, and, moreover, he knew that the 20 rubles which was asked for the hire of a team would be a serious matter for her, for Darya Alexandrovna's pecuniary affairs had got into a very wretched condition, and caused the Levins as much anxiety as if they had been their own. Darya Alexandrovna, by Levin's advice, set out at early dawn. The weather was fine, the calash was comfortable, the horses went merrily, and on the box, next to the coachman, in place of a footman, sat the bookkeeper, whom Levin had sent for the sake of greater security. Darya Alexandrovna dropped off to sleep and did not wake up till they reached the place where they had to change horses. It was at the same rich muzhik's house where Levin had stopped on his way to Sviazhsky's. After she had taken tea and talked a while with the women about their children and with the old man about Count Vronsky, for whom he had great respect, Darya Alexandrovna proceeded on her way about 10 o'clock. At home, on account of her maternal cares, she never had much time to think. Consequently now, during this 4 hours' journey, all the thoughts that had been so long restrained suddenly began to throng through her brain, and she passed her whole life in review as she had never before done, and from every side. Those thoughts were strange even to herself. First she thought of her children, and began to worry over them, though her mother and her sister, and it was the latter on whom she chiefly relied, had promised to look after them. If only Masha doesn't do some stupid thing, and Grisha doesn't get kicked by the horse, and if Lily doesn't have an attack of indigestion, she said to herself. Then questions of the present moment began to mingle with questions of the immediate future. She began to consider how she must make changes in her rooms when she returned to Moscow. She must refurnish her drawing room. Her eldest daughter would need a shuba for winter. Then came questions of still more distant future. How should she best continue the children's education? The girls can be easily managed, she said to herself. But the boys? It is well that I am able to look after Grisha, but it comes from the fact that I am free just now, with no baby in prospect. Of course there's no dependence to be placed on Stiva. I shall be able to bring them up with the assistance of excellent people, but if I have any more babies... And it occurred to her how unjust was the saying that the curse laid on woman lay in the pangs of childbirth. Childbirth is nothing, but pregnancy is such misery, she said to herself, recalling the last experience of the sort, and the death of the child. And the thought brought to mind her talk with the young wife at the post-house. When asked if she had children, this peasant woman had answered cheerfully, "I had one daughter, but God relieved me of her. She was buried in Lent." "And are you very sad about her?" "Why should I be? Father has plenty of grandchildren as it is, and she would have only been one care more. You can't work or do anything. It hinders everything." This reply had seemed revolting to Darya Alexandrovna, in spite of the young peasant woman's appearance of good nature, but now she could not help recalling what she had said. There was certainly a grain of truth in those cynical words. "Yes, and as a general thing," said Darya Alexandrovna, as she looked back over the 15 years of her married life, "pregnancy, nausea, dullness of spirits, indifference to everything, and worst of all, ugliness. Kitty, our little young pretty Kitty, how ugly even she has grown, and I know well what a fright I become when I am in that condition. The birth pains, the awful sufferings, and that last moment, then the nursing of the children, the sleepless nights, the agonies." Darya Alexandrovna shuddered at the mere recollection of the agony which with almost every one of her children she had suffered from broken breast. Then the illnesses of the children, that panic of fear, then their education, their evil disposition. She recalled little Masha's disobedience in going into the raspberry bush, the lessons, Latin, everything that is so incomprehensible and hard, and, above all, the death of these children. And once more she went over the undying pangs that weighed down her maternal heart in the cruel remembrance of the death of her youngest child, the nursling who died of the croup, and his funeral, and the indifference of other people as they looked at the little pink coffin, and her own heart-rending grief, which none could share, as she looked for the last time on the pallid brow with the clinging curls, and the surprised half-open mouth visible for one instant ere they shut down the cover with its silver-gilt cross. And what is all this for? What will be the result of it all? That I never have a moment of rest, spending my days now in bearing children, now in nursing them, forever irritable, complaining, self-tormented, and tormenting others, repulsive to my husband. I shall live on, and my children will grow up wretched, ill-educated, and poor. Even now, if I had not been able to spend the summer with the Levins, I don't know how we should have got along. Of course Kostya and Kitty are so considerate that we can't feel under obligation to them. But this cannot go on so. They will be having children of their own, and then they will not be able to help us any more. Even now their expenses are very heavy. What then? Papa, who has kept almost nothing for himself, won't be able to help us, will he? One thing is perfectly certain. I cannot educate my children unaided, and, if I have to have assistance, it will be humiliating. Well, let us suppose that we have good luck, if no more of the children die and I can manage to educate them. Under the most favourable circumstances, they will at least turn out not to be bad. That is all that I can hope for. And to bring about so much, how much suffering, how much trouble I must go through. My whole life is spoiled. Again she recalled what the young peasant woman had said, and again it was odious to her to remember it, but she could not help agreeing that there was a grain of coarse truth in her words. "Is it much farther, Mihaila?" said Darya Alexandrovna of the bookkeeper, in order to check these painful thoughts. "They say it is 7 versts from this village." The calash was rolling through the village street and across a little bridge. On the bridge was passing a whole troop of peasant women talking with loud and merry voices and carrying their sheaves on their backs. The women paused on the bridge and gazed inquisitively at the calash. All the faces turned toward Darya Alexandrovna seemed to her healthy and cheerful, mocking her with the very joy of life. "All are full of life. All of them enjoy themselves," said Darya Alexandrovna, continuing to commune with her own thoughts, as she passed by the peasant women and was carried swiftly up the little hill, pleasantly rocking on the easy springs of the old calash. "While I, like one let loose from prison, am free for a moment from the life that is crushing me with its cares. All other women know what it is to live, these peasant women, and my sister Natalie, and Varenka, and Anna, whom I am going to visit, every one but me. And they blame Anna. Why? Am I really any better than she? At least I have a husband whom I love, not, to be sure, as I wish to love him, but I love him in a way, and Anna did not love hers. In what respect is she to blame? She desired to live, and God put that desire into our hearts. Very possibly I might have done the same thing, and to this day I am not certain whether I did well in taking her advice at that horrible time when she came to visit me in Moscow. Then I ought to have left my husband and begun my life all over again. If I might have loved and been loved. And now are things any better? I cannot respect him, but I need him," she said to herself, referring to her husband. "And so I endure him. Is that any better? At that time I still had the power of pleasing. I had some beauty then," said Darya Alexandrovna, still pursuing her thoughts, and the desire to look at herself in a mirror came over her. She had a small travelling mirror in her bag, and she wanted to take it out, but, as she looked at the backs of the coachman and the swaying bookkeeper, she felt that she should be ashamed of herself if either of them turned round and saw her, and so she did not take out the mirror. But even though she did not look at the mirror, she felt that even now it was not too late, for she remembered Sergey Ivanovitch, who was especially amiable to her, and Stiva's friend, the good Tarotsuin, who had helped her take care of the children during the time of the scarlatina, and had been in love with her. And then there was still another, a very young man, who, as her husband used jestingly to remark, found her prettier than all her sisters. and all sorts of passionate and impossible romances rose before her imagination. Anna has done perfectly right, and I shall never think of reproaching her. She is happy, she makes some one else happy, and she is not worn out as I am, but keeps all her freshness, and her mind open to all sorts of interests," said Darya Alexandrovna. And a roguish smile played over her lips because, as she passed Anna's romantic story in review, she imagined herself simultaneously having almost the same experiences with a sort of collective representation of all the men who had ever been in love with her. She, just like Anna, confessed everything to her husband. And the amazement and perplexity which she imagined Stepan Arkadyevitch displayed at this confession caused her to smile. With such daydreams she reached the side road that led from the highway to Vozdvizhenskoe.